There is one question that has been asked to me over and over the past several weeks that I just need to do a video on just to capture all of my thoughts and explain what I know about this. Now that question is, what happened to Enigma's Cold War server? Yes, it changed to Heatblur's Cold War server, but what happened to the player count? Roll back time 6 months and Enigma's Cold War was the server on DCS, really only competing with Growling Sidewinders in terms of popularity. It would always be populated at all hours of the day, and at peak times it would inevitably be full. Nothing came close to it, but now, although you do get player amounts at certain times of the day, plenty of other times during quieter times there will be hardly anyone on, maybe a couple of people, maybe just the server bot. So yeah, why is this? What happened? Why is it all seemingly going wrong? And I just wanted to put together a video on my thoughts of this and explain as best I can from my point of view what has happened here. Now first off and simplest off, it is not dead. It is still going. It still has population. It is not as busy as it once was, but you still get population, particularly at peak times. You can still reliably find people online. You can still jump into a game. As you can see here in the background, this was just me picking a random Friday and jumping on and seeing what was going on. You can still get plenty of action, especially on the more focused campaigns where everyone is a little more clustered together. It still gets really hectic here. So it's not dead. Absolutely not dead. But yes, I will admit, the player count is significantly down. And as for me, yeah, I have certainly been putting in less time on this. You certainly have noticed on the this channel that I've been putting out fewer and fewer Enigma's Cold War videos. A lot of that is because on the times I happen to be around, when I poke my head in, it is either massively blue stacked to the point that I don't really feel like playing either side, or it is just empty, it's a ghost town. So yeah, something has happened. Now, I'd say that there are actually several contributing factors here. It's not just one thing that has brought the server down from its height of popularity, but lots of things. The major one, I think, is actually something that's really good for the DCS community, and that is that we have seen a rise of other competing servers that are doing a really good job. Most notably the Contention server and the new Shadow Reapers servers. Go back 6 months, as I was saying, and yes, Enigma's was dominating, but Enigma's was really your one choice for a full dynamic campaign. And I think dynamic campaigns really do speak to a lot of DCS players. We are all fairly long-term minded. DCS is not a small time investment. It can take you hours upon hours to learn a single module, so it makes sense that people who play DCS would like a long-term thing, like a campaign where you can slowly contribute over several evenings towards a bigger and larger story of what happens in this massive battle. It's really satisfying to know that a campaign ends depending on hours upon hours of work by multiple players, and not just an arbitrary number that gets picked at the end as to who killed the most. You get a little pop-up message, okay, red team wins because they killed 15 more players, and then the server resets. Really nice having this long, in-depth campaign. And as I said, used to just be Enigma's Cold War that was out there. But now we have Contention, and now we have Shadow Reapers. Both have excellent dynamic campaigns that really do offer something else that Enigma's Cold War don't. They both have unique features. With Contention, I'd say the major unique feature is the whole CTLD system, that the ground units are largely dictated by the actions of the players. You can build things yourselves, and so everything is going to be different each time. And for Shadow Reapers, it is quite clearly the mission system that really dominates that and gives that a unique feel. So this has just given players new options that we can try. And I think this is fantastic, because I did not like the state that the DCS community was in 6 months ago, with everything really being locked onto either Growling Sidewinders server or Enigma's Cold War. That meant really if you wanted a populated server you had two choices, and what happened every busy time, so every time there was a large holiday, every time it's a weekend in the evening, those would get full up. And so normally if you wanted to play DCS on a Friday evening, you'd be looking at sitting in a queue for Enigma's Cold War, and with DCS not having a queue system, that was really luck of the draw as to when you got in. And that is not good for the community. You don't want most players just sitting waiting in a queue. For a long time I was arguing that Enigma needed to launch a second server, but I think this is a much, much better solution, that we now just have multiple servers. And we do seem to have the population to be able to support these multiple servers. Yes, the population has been split between them, but you can still reliably find a server with population on at almost any time during the day. Now, that does of course raise the question of, yeah, we've got these more servers on, we've got competition, the community is being split, so why is it being so unevenly split? Why are Shadow Reapers in contention getting such a big share of the population now, whereas Enigma's is very much trailing behind? And I think a big part of this is contention and Shadow Reapers have something new to offer, whereas from the Enigma's Cold War side, or Heatblur Cold War side now, we've not seen a huge amount of new systems to play with for a very long time. Yeah, there's some new ways that they've oriented the maps, new arrangements of that, but the core gameplay is exactly the same. If you want to do ground striking, it is taking off, going to the frontline hex, looking for the white buildings with the vehicles around them. Depending on the time zone, you pretty much know exactly what you're going up against there. You know there's going to be a shulker in the area, you know there's going to be some Bofors that you want to take out, you know there's going to be some lighter vehicles you can then follow up and take out with smaller fire. If you're in a cap mood, you know exactly what's going on. You're taking off at the base a little bit further back. You're flying to the front line, letting the EWR point you in the right direction, and then you're hunting down the same planes. Not a lot changes. There used to be quite frequent updates to Enigma's Cold War server with new features, new systems. That really has largely stopped. It used to be a little bit of a joke on my Discord server that if I was to release an Enigma's Cold War guide onto a system, that system would be changed and patched significantly within a week. This happened more than once. Now though, really the systems have stayed exactly the same for a very, very long time. And I know that a large part of this is down to a series of DCS bugs. DCS has been putting through all sorts of updates that have really badly hammered servers, and a lot of servers have been in this kind of troubleshooting stage. They're putting out the fires caused by massive performance drops. And yeah, your server staff only have so much time, so if they're spending all of their time putting out fires caused by EDs, less than optimal patches, they're not going to have time to put in new systems. And although it's completely understandable, that does mean that the gameplay has become repetitive. You go into Enigma's Cold War, you know what you're getting, and I've seen this echoed with a lot of people who are really burnt out of Enigma's Cold War, getting tired of doing the exact same thing over and over without any real changes going on. And this isn't surprising. Enigma's Cold War's been the big server for years. There is only so many different varieties you're going to be able to play. People do naturally seek a little bit of a change there. I personally have been getting variety by putting in different modules, but that's not an option for everyone. Modules in DCS are expensive, time to learn modules is very, very time consuming, and so not everyone can jump around different modules to get their variety. So having these brand new servers coming up with unique systems, interesting systems, doing things that Enigma's Cold War never did, that certainly is drawing a lot of people. And particularly those two servers have a really good way of avoiding that repetition. In contention, although generally what you're doing is the same thing each time, you're trying to push the front by taking airfields and FARPs, but what you find at those airfields and FARPs are different every time because they're put down by players. You may have an occasion where you come across an airfield and there's barely anything in it, just the default defences. You might come across that airfield the next week, attacking it in the same way, to find that someone's put down a massive SAM net nearby that you need to deal with, and then when you try and deal with that, maybe they've got a surprise of AAA hiding in low levels around you. You might all of a sudden have a massive tank column coming down the road that you have to deal with to protect your airfields. It's different every time. And then with the Shadow Reaper server, very similarly with the mission system, it really does change each time. Even if you just want to, say, fly an A-10 and do ground strike, you get a lot of options there because of the way the missions are set up. You might be tasked with taking out enemy air defences, you might be tasked with taking out a moving convoy, you might be tasked with taking out munitions depots. Very different each time, different targets, different areas, really helping to spice things up. Whereas again, in Heatblur's Cold War, Enigma's Cold War, we've not really seen any new targets for a very, very long time. I think a large part of this is simply that the more complex a server gets, the more time the devs have to put in just maintaining the systems rather than being able to put in new things. There's going to be an upper limit. And I am wondering if part of it is that without Enigma as the head to organise things and push things, if the development has become slightly less focused. I'm very unsure about that. That is purely my speculation. Now, that does kind of lead to the next point. A lot of people are wondering, well, is it because Enigma stepped back from the server that it suddenly seems to have taken a nosedive? I don't think so. I don't think having Heatblur Cold War as opposed to Enigma's Cold War being the title of the server really makes that much of a difference. Most people knew this was coming for a long time, and the drop in server population happened while it was still called Enigma's Cold War. And yeah, Enigma definitely built up some hype for the server with his channel and his videos covering it, but he never seemed to really overly advertise the server. Enigma seems a pretty humble person. He would never really push his server, so at the most part he was just highlighting it every now and then with some of these interesting videos, but he definitely didn't like put in a massive campaign that is now completely absent. If anything, I would hope that being attached to one of the major module makers would have given the server even more hype and clout compared to being attached to just Enigma himself. So yeah, I don't think the change of ownership of the server really had a massive impact there. I've certainly not seen anyone who has said anything about, right, I'm not going to play the server because it's now Heatblur instead of Enigma. I think the timing there is just a little bit more coincidental than anything. And if there was an impact to Enigma taking a step back, I think it may have been more that the direction of the server is a little less handled by him personally, so it's left to the same server staff, but without him as the head, there definitely seems to be less progress being made. Now, the final smoking gun, and one of the major contributors in my opinion, is unfortunately the F4. I think the F4 was just too perfect for the server. Obviously, the F4 was one of the most awaited modules, had huge amounts of sales at launch, loads of people jumped on, and that flooded the server. That's to be expected. Every time a new module comes out, it absolutely floods all of the servers as everyone wants to jump on and try the new thing. Normally that quietens down, but on Heatblur Cold War, that's not happened. It has stayed being a major module. It is really dominating Blue 4 every single time you look at the server list. And yes, it's a good module, but it's also a little bit too perfect of a fit for the timeline of where this is set. It can do pretty much anything. It can do ground attack, it can do seed, it can do strike, and it can handle itself quite happily in cap. And so what this has led to is the server population is very often massively stacked with F4s on the blue side, and very often very heavily blue stacked in general. You can quite often end up with blue outnumbering red easily by 2 or 3 times, even with these hard limits that the servers attempted to put in, still hasn't addressed the problem. And that's not really fun for either side. For blue, it means that you are flying with all of the same planes, all going out together, all doing the same thing, fighting over the very few targets that you can get a hold of. And for red, it means you're always outnumbered. And although I do quite like being the slight underdog and going up against numerically superior opponents, means you get a lot of fun a lot quickly, but it still does get tiring, and there is an upper limit to when you're always in a fight that is a 3-on-1, it just gets tiring after a while. And unfortunately, this is where I would say that the server staff haven't handled this the best. The efforts of putting in hard limits I don't think was the right way to go. We need a way to limit the F4, and particularly limit the F4's capability. It seems unfairly advantaged in a lot of the settings it has. It seems to always have missiles even when other planes don't. It has more Mavericks than the A10 does on most of the time zone scenarios. It has its missiles quite happily, while things like the Sever have had their missiles removed for the sake of balance. And the more I see the changes, the more it just seems that everything else is being hobbled, particularly on the blue side, in order to try and encourage players to move onto the red side. But the F4 is still staying with its really quite full loadout, meaning that more and more it's just becoming that blue is just the F4 side versus red as to everyone who doesn't want to fly an F4. The one that I'd like to highlight here is the F1. The F1E is a credit aircraft. It is restricted behind, I believe, 20 credits to get something with a single Fox 1 on it, whereas on the same scenarios the F4 gets all of its Fox 1s, which is a lot of Fox 1s on the F4, gets those out the back, no credit restrictions on any of the eras. And this is the one area that I am wondering if the shift to Heatblur Cold War may have made things worse. Now, I don't think either Heatblur or the server devs intentionally are making Heatblur's new module to be all nice and happy and pretty and being the best module in the server. But I am wondering if there is some unconscious reluctance to nerf the F4, because it is the pride and joy of the new server owners, and it's kind of this self-fulfilling thing. It is such a popular module on the server that if they do nerf it, it's going to annoy a lot of people. But while it doesn't get nerfed, it is becoming more and more popular, so it's just dominating the server more and more. And this, I think, is really something the server staff need to address. I don't think putting in the caps is working. That just restricts people from being able to join and being able to play with their friends. I think what needs to happen is the F4 needs to have a serious balance pass on all of its eras, and to make the other Blue4 modules more competitive. It definitely should never have more Mavericks than an A10. It definitely should not have its missiles where other planes that are physically less capable don't get their missiles. It should not be unrestricted in terms of credits, while planes that are really matching it or inferior to it are behind massive credit walls. And I think the longer this is allowed to continue, I think the worse the server's going to be for it. So yeah, that is the best explanation I have with my limited knowledge as to what is going on. Hopefully that has wrapped up what my opinions are, what can be done in order to improve the situation. So yeah, all in all, it is not the end of the world. We have more servers online, and Heatblur's Cold War is still trucking along. I've got video footage in the background of me having a fun time on Heatblur's Cold War. But in my opinion, there has been several factors that have very much contributed to the decline of the server over the last several months. So anyway, do let me know your opinion of this. If there's anything I've missed out, if there's anything that I've got completely wrong, let me know down below. I will certainly still be doing Heatblur Cold War in the future, don't worry. I am enjoying the server still, just haven't done that many videos on it recently. But until next time, remember to be kind to yourselves and everyone else. Cheers.